Hi, my name's Nathan Matten, and welcome to Resync, a show where we talk about purpose, our individual search for meaning, and systemic change and how it happens. Before I get into this, I want you to know that I'd love feedback on each episode. If you listen to this and hate it, tell me. If you love it, tell me, or anything in between. You can email me at resyncpod@gmail.com to give me the feedback. Okay, onwards. So today I'm with Bryan Ungard, the Chief Purpose Officer at Decurion. He joined Decurion as the Chief Information Officer, has a bachelor's degree in computer science from Hiram College, and a master's of business administration from the University of Michigan. Additionally, he holds a second Dan black belt in Aikido. So what can you learn in this conversation? Not only does Bryan think about excellence and organizational capacity, he roots the personal growth and organizational growth in something larger. Counter to what most people in HR say, he claims,
the best way to create a developmental culture for the people is to not start with the people, is to first start working on a vision for the organization itself to be able to play a dramatically bigger role in whatever living system it serves.
This can be a great question and opportunity for any leader. Can you find your organization's largest purpose and then ask people to grow to make it happen, acknowledging it could feel uncomfortable? This is how Bryan argues organizations can provide the most value and life on the planet. Bryan didn't get to this idea in a straight line in his career. He started his career in IT and was only through time off and following the who, not the what in his career. He now helps lead a network of businesses at Decurion and is an industry leader trying to reform how organizations operate.
They were this movie theater company in Los Angeles, and I had no interest in working for either a movie theater company or living in Los Angeles. So I kind of wrote them off right off the bat. But not long after that, I ended up talking with a guy named Kaz Godz. Kaz started challenging me on some of my assumptions about business as being a place that was about just taking money and treating people instrumentally. And he kind of had me at hello when he started that sort of conversation. And then he managed to slip in, oh, by the way, Decurion's looking for head of IT. And 3 months later, I was working at Decurion.
So how can you follow the who as a leader? The people who have you at hello, as Bryan says. This is often a good guide to what's important. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. And I wanted to start talking about Aikido, not Bryan's professional career. Bryan has practiced Aikido for 12 years because he saw something incredible. Someone who appeared much smaller, literally tossing people around the room in a martial arts practice. This is a great analogy to his career, where he's trying to create and help others create Aikido master organizations that defy expectation through aligning purpose and people development together. Can you tell us a little bit about what that black belt means, Bryan?
It's second dan means second degree black belt in Aikido, which after you've been training for a number of years, you first go through a series of beginner tests, but then you're eventually invited to test for a black belt. And one of the more memorable phrases that my teacher said to me was that black belt does not mean that you've really gotten someplace, some major level of achievement. It just means you're ready to start learning. So in theory, there's 10 levels, more practically 4 or 5 levels. And I just recently, earlier this year, took my second degree black belt.
Wow. So how long have you been doing that for?
It's been almost, not quite 12 years now.
Okay. So just a small endeavor.
Small endeavor. It's been extremely meaningful to me.
Can you tell me a little bit about what's made it meaningful?
I'm not a particularly athletic guy. In fact, I've got a leg injury that would, a lot of people would think, including myself, that something like Aikido is just off the table. But within the first 6 months or so of joining Decurion, I discovered that they had an Aikido program, which was unexpected to begin with. And they invited me to an Aikido demonstration where a teacher from Japan came in. And he proceeded to throw this big guy around the room. And when I was watching it, none of it made sense because it didn't appear to be real. this little Japanese guy would barely touch this larger American guy, and he would literally kind of go flying across the mat. And my first two thoughts were, well, this is clearly fake. They're choreographing the whole thing. The guy is agreeing to throw himself across the mat. Followed quickly by thought number two, which was, if it's not fake, I really want to know more about this.
What a good metaphor for your career as well, I think. One of the things I've appreciated from learning about you is that you really take your time to make sure to do things right. You're not interested in kind of short-term quick fixes, such as a 12-year pursuit of Aikido suggests, and you are interested in things that at the surface may seem magical, but if you go very deep, are very powerful if you can learn how to wield them.
It does seem to be a lifelong question for me of I guess one way of asking it is I've just been continually curious about how stuff works, maybe even why stuff works. And the first 12 answers to that always just whet my appetite to kind of keep on going. And I've never discovered the end. There never seems to be a place that I get to that says, oh, okay, I know everything about that now. I can stop asking questions. It just seems like questions lead to more interesting questions.
Wonderful. And I want to talk to you about that. But before we go too far, I would just love for you to share a little bit about what Decurion does, since we probably will reference that at some point in this conversation.
Decurion is at this point, it's about a 70-year-old family business that started in Los Angeles back in the 40s, something like that, in the movie theater business. Back when movie theaters were drive-in theaters, I believe that Decurion opened, it was known as Pacific Theaters back then, opened the first drive-in theater west of the Mississippi. And it's grown through the years to not only shift and change as the movie theater industry has shifted and changed, but has also grown into one of the larger, more respected commercial real estate companies on the West Coast in Hawaii. It also has a senior living facility, which is a new business that it's gotten into, and a number of smaller diversified businesses. But what's interesting about Decurion is that it doesn't really matter the businesses that we're in. What's become more important to us, particularly in the last 20 years or so, is the way that we do business. And we've ended up designing a way of operating the business, a culture, a philosophy around operating the business that we continue to hope, could shift at the way business is done, from a more traditional way of business being just about making money and about extracting the value of making money for somebody, to a larger, more holistic way of thinking about business, in that there is really no contradiction between being an excellent business that generates value and a place where people can grow and develop to become more and more themselves. And in fact, rather than those things being contradictory, that they line up as one thing. By pursuing unlocking business in a value, no matter what business it is, you can actually create ideal conditions for people to become more and more who they are, who they could be. Well, let me share kind of an example from our theater business. A normal approach to business is you train somebody to be able to do that job and then keep them in that job for as long as possible, because it makes business sense to kind of maximize your return from having put the training dollars into that person. We take a very different approach. Our first conversation with we call them crew members, with a crew member coming into the theater is likely to be about what that crew member wants to be when they grow up. A lot of these, not everybody, but a lot of them are younger people. So we'd be in a conversation about, well, what are your interests? Who are you, and what is lighting up for you in your life? Do you have a direction you want to go? Is there a particular specialty? Do you want to be president? Do you want to be a mechanic? Do you want to be a doctor? Do you want to be, any number of things? And depending on what they say from that, which might be, I don't know what I want to be when I grow up, we would be saying, okay, well, why don't we get busy about setting you up for your next steps in your life? So it turns out no matter what you answered, the business of running a movie theater contains lots of meta skills that would prepare you for being president or a doctor or a mechanic or a consultant. And the business of writing a show schedule, for example, requires a lot of critical thinking, a lot of ability to be able to think both large outside of the theater and small inside the theater. Those same skills would be required if you were going to be a doctor or if you were going to be a mechanic. Any job that has thinking about a staff involved would require the skills of somebody putting together a film schedule and a crew schedule. We would then deliberately create a development schedule for a crew member where they are shifted around the movie theater business so that they get to learn different aspects of the movie theater business, but always coming back to how it's relevant for them in their lives going forward, to the point where what you're asking them to do is help run the movie theater business with you. Don't come in and just do a job. Just don't come in and be the film scheduler or the popcorn popper or the ticket tearer, but understand why the film scheduler, the popcorn popper, and the ticket tearer play roles inside the theater that add up to the entire theater performing the way it can perform. And if you're going to unlock the potential of that movie theater, how do you need to think about the entire thing outside the box to unlock its potential? So you're teaching people a whole set of individual skills, but you're also teaching them to be business people. You're teaching them to be people that can think about the whole and the parts at the same time, which really works for them because you're setting them up for whatever it is they want to do next in life. And oh, by the way, it really works for us because you're slowly filling the entire building with people that are that have the perspective of each part of the business, but also have the perspective of the whole, which adds up to a talented crew members that are capable of doing a lot of things, but all of it from a place of interest because they understand how it fits in with what you're trying to do and it fits in with what they're trying to do.
Great. Yeah, that's a really tangible example, and I think it's very easy to see how that can work. Are there, I guess the question that it brings up, though, is it sounds really good, but is it hard to do in practice? And if so, what makes it hard in practice?
It is hard to do in practice. It's hard to do in practice probably for 2 or 3 different reasons. One of them is, and maybe the major one, is it's just hard to keep the prevailing assumptions about what business is about out of the culture. It's such a strong assumption that that people. So one of the places that we started to make our new culture from was starting from a different assumption set. We've ended up calling them axioms, which is a bit of a jargony word. But an axiom is something that you just hold to be as self-evidently true. We just believe these things are true because they're just really obvious to us. So a few of our axioms is that people are ends in and of themselves, not just means. So people are means, people in business are means, right? You hire people to do stuff. But they are also ends in and of themselves because they're people, because they're worth valuing just because they're people. So we hold that as one of our axioms, that they're worth valuing just because they're people, not only means. We also hold that people naturally develop, that it's kind of our natural state to develop. It's not something you have to do to people. It's not something that you have to find some motivation and light that. It's what we do. And if we're not doing it, it's because there's a whole bunch of barriers that have gotten in our way. And our job is not to develop people, it's to find out what's getting in the way of what people do naturally for themselves. And we also believe that work is meaningful. And it's not just a little bit of work is meaningful. It's not just the cool work that you can do is meaningful, but all work, from some of the mundane to some of the more exciting work, all of it can be meaningful. And those three assumptions by themselves, that people are engine of themselves, people naturally develop, work is meaningful, those are pretty different assumptions than what is out there in corporate America. Because I think in corporate America, the prevailing assumptions are that you get what you pay for, and it's pretty much a transaction. You hire people instrumentally to do a job, and you don't really expect more than that. All work is not meaningful, I think, is a prevailing assumption. Some work is meaningful. If you're lucky, if you play your cards right, if you have a mentor, perhaps you'll get a chance to do some meaningful work. But mostly a career is full of time in the salt mines and a lot of drudgery. And people naturally developing, maybe some people naturally develop, but I hear a lot of conversations in the business culture around trying to find the good people, the ones that really want to make something of themselves, as opposed to, in general, the belief that all people develop. So what makes a deliberately developmental culture hard? Part of it is keeping those assumptions alive from a culture out in the business world that is continually kind of drumbeat-wise trying to get you to believe that those things aren't true. So there has to be a regular way of making them true for us, of bringing them into our organization in a way that breathes life back into them. So that's probably the second challenge that we have, is once we've got some positive air pressure in the building that kind of keeps the outside assumptions in, and healthier, more whole assumptions in the organization, is how do you keep it all alive? Because it's really easy for that stuff to become jargony and kind of somebody repeating what the powers that be say, as opposed to having it be really true for people. And one of the primary ways that we do that is something called building community. We spend a lot of time in groups. In fact, we run Decurion both communally and hierarchically. So we have an org chart. That hierarchical org chart is alive and well and has power. But we also have a communal structure for the company. And our desire is to run the organization in those communal structures. And those communal structures do more than just help run the company. They're also places for authentic, rich, and authentic conversations to take place, where we wrestle with things like, how do we keep the developmental culture alive? How do we keep this real for people? Where is it not working anymore? Where do we need to throw some stuff out? And where do we need to experiment and innovate again to bring new stuff in? That is a continual renewal process. And if there's one thing that I'm learning again for, it seems like, the 25th time, it's that if you're not renewing something, it's probably dying. There is no such thing as steady state. There is no such thing as keeping things the same as they were before. You're either in a continual renewal process, or it's starting to fade away and become, have the life go out of it.
Bryan shares what is the most unexpected part of doing this.
It started here at Decurion with a conversation first about the organization, not about the people. That sounds a little like heresy, but the best way to create a developmental culture for the people is to not start with the people, is to first start working on a vision for the organization itself to be able to play a dramatically bigger role in whatever living system it serves. And inevitably, what we will find is in order for the organization to play a bigger role, a bigger version of itself, a larger contribution that it could make, and it could probably be the only organization that can make that because it's unique, it's going to have to develop. It's going to have to develop capacities and awareness and wisdom and decision-making capabilities that it doesn't have right now. And in order for it to develop, it's going to create a developmental pull on everybody that's in the organization for them to be able to become larger versions of whoever they are now. Because what they're pulled to do is to be able to help the organization make its contribution in the world. It all becomes this nested way of serving something bigger than we are as the thing that really creates the meaning, both organizationally and individually.
Thank you for sharing all these interesting anecdotes about what really makes Decurion work and the challenges. So coming into Decurion 12 years ago, who were you, and did you know you were going to embark on this journey you've just described?
I knew a little bit about the journey, but not nearly what it was going to turn into. So as your bio mentioned, I joined as the head of IT. And up until that point, I'd had 25 or so years in high tech. I'd been part of a consulting business back in Michigan, systems integration business, where myself and a couple partners helped companies like Ford and General Motors and La-Z-Boy figure out how to integrate technology on manufacturing shop floors and kind of make it all work. And back to my earlier reference about asking why, I'd become at a very early age in high school and in college very enamored with computers because they seemed magical in some sort of way. And this was a long time before cell phones and supercomputers. It was just unbelievable to me that there were these machines that could be doing millions and millions of computations in fractions of a second, and that you could use them to do really useful things for people. So I ended up in my mid-20s helping customers in Michigan start to do this. But it really didn't take that many years before I started realizing that the difference in how customers use technology didn't seem to be about the technology. I could give, or my company could give, the same sort of technology to the same sort of company. And one company would do amazing things with those technological tools. And the other company would do the opposite, would do nothing useful with the tools whatsoever. In fact, they'd use those tools to kind of make a mess of things and then blame all sorts of situations or me on where that mess came from. And I started getting curious about where that difference came from. And inevitably, it kind of led to the people that were involved in the situation. So by the 2000s or so, I was kind of squarely in the question of you have this high technology that has so much potential to it, but the technology seems gated, or the potential seems gated by the human organizations that the potential is embedded in. And that seems to be a real struggle. How do you actually, what's going on in human organizations, and how do you start to unlock that potential? So I went back to business school in Michigan to figure out that answer, and really loved business school, but it turns out that they weren't even asking those questions, much less supplying those answers. And I ended up going in a different way. So I ended up moving to Santa Fe, New Mexico. It was either a spiritual crisis or a midlife crisis. There was some sort of inflection point where, for a variety of reasons, we closed up the business in Michigan. And I moved to Santa Fe and tried to figure out what my next step was, and read 100 books, learned about Ken Wilber and a number of other teachers, and really started to imagine, dream really without a lot of specificity about, what would it be like for a business to start to think differently about about the potential of the business, about the potential of people? What would it be like for people to be valued differently inside of organizations?
And so, what was important about that question to you? I hear you talking about people would use the technology you guys created different ways, but what really made that such an important question that it was something you wanted to shift your entire career? I mean, doing that kind of work is pretty different than running IT or something of that nature.
Well, the flip side of that was that I'd also been face to face with the suffering that is created inside organizations. So, as part of my consulting company, I got in and out of a lot of different businesses, all the way from the big OEMs in Detroit to small mom and pop shops to everything in between. And I think, at least from my perspective, what I saw was a lot of suffering in those places, a lot of people trading their time and life energy for the money they needed to piece together a life. And most of them were not happy, it seemed to me, from my perspective. Most of them were not passionate about what they were doing. There were a few that seemed to be having this game work for them, but they were by far the exception to the rule. And business seemed like it was somehow institutionalizing this level of manipulation and using of people. That was fairly horrifying to me. And I'd been raised by a family that was suspicious of business to begin with. And so I was never quite comfortable in a business setting, even as I was running a business with a couple of partners and trying to grow and develop something that was different and better. But I didn't really have good language about what better meant. So in going to Santa Fe and reading all these books, I was very keen on not only is it this unlocking the potential that might be there that technology pointed to, but what about, couldn't we just create a place where people would want to work, where people were passionate about something, where people would want to get out of bed in the morning and put their energy and life into it, not just because of the money or the benefits that they were getting. And that wasn't particularly true for me a lot of the times. I'm realizing how much of this was a personal journey of mine of making the money wasn't cutting it for me. It was important for the life I needed to live and how I needed to provide for my family. But I was noticing that making more money wasn't making me more happy. And that was added to the list of questions to ask about, well, what is a meaningful life? What is, how does potential figure in that? What is purpose? Do I have a purpose? Do organizations have purpose? How does this all play together to add up to, back then, probably what I would have asked as a life well lived?
Mm. And so then Decurion, how did you get from those 100 books and a lot of reflection to Decurion? Was it that sort of the place you thought might be an answer, or was that just a step along the way?
It turned out to be exactly the place that I thought might be the answer. At first, I didn't recognize them because they introduced themselves. I ran into them at a Ken Wilber conference, and they were this movie theater company in Los Angeles, and I had no interest in working for either a movie theater company or living in Los Angeles. So I kind of wrote them off right off the bat. But not long after that, I ended up talking with a guy named Kaz Godz, who was the architect and change agent behind a huge cultural transformation that Decurion went through. And Kaz started challenging me on some of my assumptions about business as being a place that was about just taking money and treating people instrumentally and not being particularly balanced or a force for good in the world. And he challenged me and said, yeah, that is often how we experience business, but that might be because business as itself, or a business organization as itself, hasn't found a way for it to develop itself into a way where it's more whole, it's more capable, it's working on developing its own potential. And could we imagine a world where organizations in general and business in particular was whole, was realizing its potential, realizing its own unique contribution that it could make? And can you imagine the change that might make possible in the world if business started to step into that change agent sort of role? And he kind of had me at hello when he started that sort of conversation. And then he managed to slip in, oh, by the way, Decurion is looking for head of IT. And 3 months later, I was working at Decurion. It became very clear to me that a place like Decurion was exactly my next step, was to figure out how to play a role in the leadership team at a company like Decurion and reimagine the possibility for business in particular, but now it's expanded to kind of human organizations in general, to play a role in the world right now, in human society in the world more broadly, and kind of the systems of the world, to be able to bring more health and wholeness to these systems.
So to shift gears away from Decurion for a bit and go back to some more general questions, what can someone today do to take action and try and implement what you're talking about here in themselves or in their organization?
There's something that we're missing, both individually and collective, where when we dream about what's possible, we skip over the part where we need to build the capacity to actually become larger and larger versions of ourselves and larger versions of the organizations that we're part of. And that capacity is an internal capacity. It's an evolutionary capacity for us to actually develop into who we are. Each one of us individually and each one of our organizations, I believe, is unique. And yet we are under-equipped to be able to express that uniqueness. And that's a different conversation from most of the conversations that are going on in the world, at least that I'm part of. The mindfulness movement, for example, I'm a huge fan of mindfulness programs of all shapes and sizes. But so many of the mindfulness programs, particularly the ones that go into business, have a little bit of the framing that says, man, the world is a toxic place. Organizational life is tough and stressful and full of anxiety. Wouldn't it be good for you to work on yourself and bring a degree of mindfulness to that so you can survive that toxicity? You can somehow bear it. And I'd like to be in a different question that says, couldn't we grow and develop the organization itself so that it wasn't toxic, so that by the organization growing and developing, in order for that organization to become what it is meant to be in the world, it would also have to develop the internal way of working and being and holding its people and holding its customers, holding the communities that it interacts with. That would be the opposite of toxic and stressful and anxiety producing. And isn't that a better solution to make our organizations mindful and mature and wise, rather than making just our people mindful so that they can put up with our obnoxious organizations? So there's an interesting reframing of potential that has to do with not only growing and developing ourselves, but growing and developing our organizations themselves.
So that was a great conversation with Bryan about big, lofty goals and ideals and how he's both switched in his life to work on these, from IT to questions of individual and organizational purpose, and what any leader can do today to seek a larger purpose and use that to help all of us grow. For Resync, my organization, well, basically just me, but I have hired a contractor or two. My higher purpose is to help you embrace discomfort. And I've got a really uncomfortable question, like really uncomfortable. Could you leave me some feedback? I'm craving to know what you thought of this episode and the rest. I'm seeing some great stats that people are listening, but what do you think? Please email me at resyncpod@gmail.com. I know that's not easy, and it perhaps is uncomfortable, but I'm asking you to do it to help us reach a higher purpose. All right. Anyway, thanks for listening to that. And I hope to see you next time.